All right, I think we're live and you're listening to, or you're watching, I should say, Taking It Black right here on 987 KISS FM. This is our YouTube. Um, I guess it's a podcast. That's all it is. It's a podcast. So you can come back and hear us periodically as we bring to you different topics for discussion. We like to think that we bring you topics and information that's informative, that you can use, information that you can use that will help you in making decisions for your family and for the community. And today is no different. Today, we're going to be discussing the fact that Alabama legislators are currently looking to ban the critical race theory, ban the actual teaching of the critical race theory in our schools. And I have spoken with you about the critical race theory in the past, explaining what it is. But I want to go talk about that a little bit more today and look at how Alabama and some other states have misconstrued what the critical race theory is and why, in fact, it's being taught and discussed throughout the country. Despite the fact that the legislature has now ended, this session has ended, they're looking forward to the next session, and some have already begun talking about, and at least one has already proposed a bill for the next session that would ban teaching a critical race theory in the state of Alabama. Now, what specifically they're saying is that this state or the United States, what they want to make sure is that we're not teaching anything that would say that this state or the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist, or that an individual, by virtue of his race, sex, is inherently racist or sexist or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. And, I just wonder if that's going to stand constitutional muster, because you are now banning thought. You're banning a theory, a teaching, a theory. And I have an issue. I take issue with that. And we're going to talk about critical race theory, which really what it does, and I'll go back through what we talked about in the past. What it does is it does presuppose that racism is embedded within the society and its institutions. Yes, it does, because racism is embedded in our society and in our society's institutions. It can't help but be, because the country was based in theory on racism. And it's some say that it's propaganda. It's not propaganda. It's not anti-American. Telling the truth is no more anti-American than calling out a family member who is abusive, physically abusive to another family member is means that you hate your family. That's not what this is. This is calling out what the issues are so that we can correct them. It is the critical race theory really is a mechanism by which we can examine and we can address racism and other forms of marginalization. And we have marginalized women. We have marginalized, almost complete genocide, if I can coin a phrase, the Native American Native American culture, Native American people. The indigenous population here has almost been wiped out. Why? Because Europeans came to this country, decided that they founded this or discovered this country. They couldn't discover something that's already here, but they decided that they discovered this country and they were going to take it, despite the fact that there were people already here. We can't teach what this legislation would say is we can't teach this. We can't teach the truth of that, how we got to that, and what we need to do to correct it. Because if you call it out, then you're going to have to do something to correct it, right? And so that's why I really believe That's what is at the gist of this banning teaching the critical race theory. I think that it's necessary. I think teaching critical race theory is necessary so that we can apply it to address these long-standing educational inequities. We have not taught the true issue of slavery in this country, or how African Americans came to this country. We've not taught the true the truth about what happened to Native Americans in this country. And it's so embedded in our culture that when we create movies, or when movies were created, you think back, those of you who are old enough to remember the old Tarzan movies. Tarzan, the white man, the only one white man in the jungle, told everybody else, including the animals, right? He talked to even the animals. He told everybody else what they needed to do. He was the savior of the jungle. Really? One white man controlled the jungle. Why? Because white people were the ones who, I'm trying to say this so that it doesn't come across that I am trying to be unnecessarily negative, but it's because the white people who wrote those scripts were writing them on the basis of the history that was taught to them. That is that the natives are always savages, and white people have to come in and be the savior of the day. That's what was. That's what has been taught. That American exceptionalism. And I remember studying that in school and being so proud that I was an American and that we had American exceptionalism. But what they were teaching me is that the Europeans came to this country, or wherever else they went, because they divided up the world. The Europeans divided up the world and decided that because of their exceptionalism, because they were so great, because they were so intelligent, they could do anything they wanted, and it was all right, including moving Native Americans further and further away from the areas that they inhabited when the Pilgrims landed here at Plymouth Rock. I'm going to read you something here that I pulled on critical race theory. By recognizing how race and racism shape our institutions, principals and teachers can find innovative ways to value the lived experience of families, prioritize the recruitment and the retention of faculty, and elevate voices of those who have historically been marginalized. One of the research projects, a group of principals, this is a group of individuals who began teaching the critical race theory in schools. And this is an example of what came out of that. One of the research projects, a group of principals was interviewed about suspension practices prior to the study. A research team reviewed suspensions data for each principal, school, and district. Now we're talking about how race is institutionalized, talking about schools, not prisons, schools. In most cases, Black students were more likely to be suspended than white students for similar offenses. Why is that? It's because of the way we have taught the issue of race in this country, or failed to teach the issue of race in this country. Racial disproportionality is in discipline, has been a well-documented phenomena spanning decades, because Black people have historically been identified as needing to be corrected, beaten, disciplined, if you would, like children. And they're always harder to discipline than white people. And I don't like using that term, and it's hard because I've been indoctrinated with it. I like saying Caucasian because we have, even the term white suggests something is right because it's white, right? You know, a little white lie is worse, is not as bad as a black lie. You know, I don't like using that term. If we're going to say, if we're going to use it, then if we're going to differentiate, I'd like to say Caucasian. But I forget myself because I've been indoctrinated myself in saying that. And every time I hear myself saying it, I recognize, okay, that's another example of my indoctrination. And I see it, but a lot of people don't. And people who are in authority don't. All critical race theory is demand critical thinking and analysis of race in application to our history. When we talk about it, we look at why did the US government continue to move west? Why did we continue to move west? And then what happened when we continued to take land going west, expanding going west? What happened to those people who were indigenous to that area? And did the country really care about those people? Why is it that we created treaties with the Native Americans and then we broke them? It was okay to break them over and over and over again, and then called them savages when they rebel to the country breaking the treaties. Again, we don't teach that. We don't teach that in schools. How did the South's economy grow? How did the South's economy grow? What was the basis of the South's economy? Free labor. That's why the U.S. as a whole was able to expand and move quickly past countries that were far more established than the U.S. Why? Because they had free labor. And with free labor, they didn't have to worry about, paying people or paying people a livable wage. They didn't have to worry. They weren't people, so they didn't have to worry about the kind of living spaces that they were subjected to. They didn't have to worry about that. And why did the United States resort to the Three-Fifths Compromise? What happened there with the Three-Fifths Compromise, which is in the Constitution, within the founding documents of this country? That compromise set the stage for how African Americans and marginalized individuals would be treated. Women were devalued at that time as well. So it marginalized certain people. And then I want to be clear on the Three-Fifths Compromise. The Three-Fifths Compromise, it was an agreement between the delegates from the North and the South when we were trying to create this country and working on the Constitutional. And this was at the Constitutional Convention back in 1787. Okay, so that three-fifths of a slave population would be counted for determining taxation and representation in the House of Representatives. So they counted slaves as 3/5 a person so as not to give the South, because if they had counted them as full individuals, they would have given the South an advantage, which they already had because they had more individuals here, more slaves. They would have given them an advantage of when it comes to the presidential election and in Congress. The Three-Fifths Compromise had a detrimental impact on the vulnerable populations, as I said, women, those who were enslaved, the nation's indigenous people. The enslavement of Black people may have been kept in check rather than allowed to spread without it, spread as much without it. So it did limit the institution of slavery. It limited the institution of slavery by deciding what states could come in as free states, what states would come in as slave states. and fewer indigenous people may have had their way of life upended um, by the removal of certain policies as a result of the 3/5 compromise. So, yeah, it may have had somewhat of a positive impact, but it set the stage in terms of race and how we would look at race and marginalized people for throughout the history of this country, even up until today. It allowed states to make the determination as to whether they would be slave states. In some cases, whether they would be slave states or free states, states where African Americans would be considered free. And when you leave that to the states, how can you not expect them to do what's in their best interest? People are going to vote, for the most part, in their best interest. And that's why slavery took hold as long as it did, because but for the push against it, the fight against it, nobody's going to turn over something to you that is beneficial to them unless you take it and or demand it. Unless a demand is made, then they're not going to turn it over. And that brings us back full circle to talk about the critical race theory. Those in power today are so frightened of sharing power with the rest of the population that they think that if they continue to just not talk about it, if we just don't talk about it, we don't talk about what happened in Tulsa, in Greenwood, a neighborhood in Greenwood that was in 1921 was destroyed just because the people were Black and successful. You know, if we don't talk about that, then we don't have to deal with the consequences of it. So they're trying to put in law that we should not discuss the truth of our history. It's important that you know this. It's important that you know this because it's important that you do something about it. Who you vote for makes all the difference in the world. We can sit around and complain about what's going on in our cities, in our countries, in our country, in our state. But unless we're prepared to do something about it, then, you know, all we're good for is complaining, and we get what we deserve. We get whatever the result is of not voting. We are deserving of that. We didn't think it was important enough to do something about. So I think that we have enough individuals in this state to change the makeup of this very conservative, over the top, far right legislature that we have in our state house. But the only way we're going to do it is to get motivated to vote. And we're going to have to do it one election at a time. And so start educating yourselves. Start educating yourselves on who you're voting for, on who is in the state house, and make sure that the people who we're voting for have the best interest of all of the state, not just some, but all of the state. You've been watching Taking It Black. I'm your host, Attorney Valerie Hicks Hale, and I'll see you back next week, same time, same place. Thanks for watching.